Are you sanding properly? Maybe not. That's what we'll discuss today. In the end, when you're sanding, it all comes down to, say it with me, grain direction. It's the same thing with everything in woodworking. You always have to take in consideration the grain direction. So we're going to do a quick experiment today to just prove that point. I've got a simple piece of pine right here to make sure that nobody thinks we're cheating. We're going to start off with a level playing field. I will plane both sides smooth, exactly the same. Okay, there's that side. There's that side. So, there we go. Pretty much equal on both sides. I've also got some 220 sandpaper. I'm going to put in my little rubber thingamabob. And I couldn't find 100 grit, so I found this 80 grit kind of coarse pad right here. Now, one of the things hand planers say about sanding is it kind of muddles a finish. But that might just be how you're sanding, because most of us are using a random orbit sander, which makes a great flat surface via sanding. But should that be the last thing you do? A random orbit sander, so I've got the 220 grit side, it's going to go over in circles all over the place. And as you can see, the grain from the plane surface to the sanded surface in that random orbit pattern is quite a bit different. It is muddled. It is a lot more matte. You're not going to see the little flecks popping out anymore. Same if I do the thing with a coarse grit, and this one will be even worse. Random orbit sander going in circles or randomly, but it goes both with the grain and against the grain. And you know, those little pigtails that you sometimes get is proof of that. And you can tell that the coarser grit definitely muddled. I mean, you've lost all that little fine stuff in there. 220, 80, or really coarse. But what would happen if we took away all of the cross grain work and I just sanded with the grain? You're not going to see my lines anymore. So whenever I put a finish on this, all that cross grain stuff is not going to sever those fibers, so it's not going to soak into that ingrain of that little break of the fiber. So you're just going to get the surface. But notice how much of the detail comes back. And it mainly comes from you're not going across those grains. And that cross grain action is what really dilutes it. So I try that on the 220 grit. And y'all can see I'm making sawdust. You have to go wait quite a bit of time in order to get rid of all that cross grain cutting. But you can see, I'm going to wipe it on my shirt. You can see it is still a little bit more muddled, but you still got a lot of those grains popping back out. And here's a coarse grit. You can really tell the difference, especially right here where I didn't do it sideways. You got some of those cross grain stuff. That really pops out. So maybe whenever you're sanding, you should reserve your final bits of sanding to something like a hand pad, where you can control exactly where the grain direction is going. So for today's bonus, I want to go on another history lesson brought to you this time by Periscope Films. But before we do that, if you've gotten stuff out of these videos, this video series, please do me a favor. Like, favorite, subscribe, do all those social medias. And visit my website where not only do I have an online store where I sell my own woodworking swag and stuff like that, but I have a lot more other free content, such as my blog. And I just published a video talking about design theory in woodworking and motorcycles of all things. Now, Periscope Pictures is Now, Periscope channel is one of those woodworking channels that goes back in the histories and gets a lot of those. I guess they were showing high school kids about different careers in the 50s that they could go into, and they would take, we call it vintage footage, but it's black and white film from probably the decade before the 50s, showing an entire industry. This one is talking about lumberjacking and going out and getting the logs, and it's fascinating to me because, hey, I go out and get trees all the time for my wood turning, and man, have things changed. But it's really fun to watch. It's just a little brain tease, but it gives you a good history lesson. I'll put the link down below to the exact video I'm talking about from Periscope channel about woodworking and the 1950 Lumberjacks.